A rusted bicycle lies abandoned on the edge of a deserted country road. Rain pounds the dusty gravel. A torn backpack spills its contents: textbooks, homework, a Polaroid photo of smiling friends. The last known location of 16-year-old Sarah Mitchell. The year 1976. The mystery would remain unsolved for nearly half a century, until now. Before we dive deeper into this haunting case that shocked a small Florida town, take a second to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the truth behind America's most perplexing cold cases. And trust me, what happened in Hancock County will leave you speechless. Hancock County, Florida, 1976. The bicentennial summer buzzed with celebration across America. While major cities hosted grand parades and firework displays, life maintained its unhurried pace in the rural communities dotting Florida's northern reaches. Here, among sprawling oak trees draped with Spanish moss and endless fields of crops, 16-year-old Sarah Mitchell lived with her parents and younger brother in their modest family home on Oak Ridge Lane. Sarah was what locals called sunshine in human form. A junior at Hancock High with golden blonde hair that caught the light, she maintained a solid B average, played clarinet in the school band, and worked weekends at Donovan's General Store to save for college. Her dream? To study journalism at the University of Florida and tell stories that matter, as she'd written in her journal. Speaking of dreams, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. Is this case familiar to you, or are you learning about Sarah's story for the first time? June 17, 1976, began like any other summer Thursday. Temperature, 89 degrees. Forecast, afternoon thunderstorms, typical Florida summer weather. Sarah ate breakfast with her family, scrambled eggs and toast, according to her mother's later testimony. She wore her favorite denim shorts, a red and white striped t-shirt, and the turquoise pendant her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday. "See you at dinner," were her last words to her mother, Janet Mitchell, as she wheeled her blue Schwinn bicycle down the driveway at 10:15 a.m. Her destination was Crystal Lake, 3 miles away, where she planned to meet friends for a swim before her afternoon shift at the store. Sarah never arrived at the lake. She never showed up for her shift. By 6 p.m., with no word from their punctual daughter, the Mitchells began calling neighbors and friends. By 8 p.m., they'd contacted the Hancock County Sheriff's Department. By midnight, 20 volunteers were combing the route between the Mitchell home and Crystal Lake. At 5:37 a.m. on June 18th, Deputy James Carlson found Sarah's bicycle thrown in the ditch alongside County Road 29, approximately halfway between her home and the lake. The front wheel was still spinning when discovered, according to initial reports, later determined to be impossible and attributed to officer stress. Her backpack lay nearby, contents scattered as if dropped in haste or struggle. There was no blood, Sheriff Walter Briggs told reporters at the first press conference. No signs of a collision, just an abandoned bicycle and personal items. What wasn't said publicly? The discovery of a single men's boot print in the soft earth near the ditch, size 11, and tire tracks indicating a vehicle had pulled onto the shoulder and then back onto the road. Within hours, the search party swelled to over 200 volunteers. They combed every inch of land within a 5-mile radius. Divers searched Crystal Lake and the nearby creek. Hunters and their dogs tracked through the dense woods that bordered the county road. Helicopters from the state police scanned from above. Nothing. Sarah Mitchell had vanished without a trace. The Mitchell family home transformed overnight. The kitchen table disappeared under maps marked with search grids. The living room became command central for volunteers. The phone rang constantly, sometimes with tips, mostly with condolences. Janet Mitchell stopped sleeping. Robert Mitchell, Sarah's father, took leave from his job at the paper mill. 12-year-old David Mitchell, Sarah's brother, stopped speaking entirely for nearly 2 weeks. "It's like someone ripped the heart out of our family," Janet told the Hancock County Gazette 1 month after the disappearance. "We're still breathing, but we're not living." As days stretched into weeks, the active search scaled back. The volunteers returned to their lives. The reporters moved on to other stories. But for the Mitchells, Time froze on June 17, 1976. The absence of closure created wounds that couldn't heal. Robert and Janet's marriage buckled under the weight of unspoken blame and different grieving styles. Robert took to the bottle. Janet threw herself into organizing search efforts and hanging posters. Young David retreated into a world of books and solitude. By the end of 1976, the case file for Sarah Mitchell's disappearance had grown thick with interviews, theories, and dead ends. But no answers, no body, no suspects, no resolution. Just a family shattered and a community forever changed by the knowledge that something terrible had happened on that ordinary summer day. And somewhere, watching it all unfold, was someone who knew exactly what had happened to Sarah Mitchell. Someone who would remain free for nearly half a century. Sheriff Walter Briggs had never handled a disappearance of this magnitude in his 15-year career. By June 20th, just 3 days after Sarah vanished, his small department was overwhelmed. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement sent 2 additional detectives to assist, and the FBI dispatched an agent from their Jacksonville field office, a rare step for a missing persons case in 1976. "We're treating this as a potential abduction," Briggs announced at the one-week press conference, the bags under his eyes betraying his lack of sleep. "Anyone with information, no matter how insignificant it might seem, please come forward." The investigation first focused on those closest to Sarah. Robert Mitchell endured 3 separate interviews, standard procedure when a child goes missing. Sarah's boyfriend, Michael Donovan, son of her employer at the general store, was questioned repeatedly about their relationship. Both were quickly cleared. Attention then shifted to known offenders. 2 registered sex offenders lived within Hancock County, one 30 miles from the abduction site, another who had been hospitalized the entire month of June. Neither connection led anywhere. A promising lead emerged when multiple witnesses reported seeing an unfamiliar dark blue pickup truck driving slowly along County Road 29 the week before Sarah disappeared. Despite a multi-county alert, the vehicle and its driver were never identified. The evidence collected at the scene seemed simultaneously substantial and insufficient. Sarah's bicycle, her backpack and its contents, the boot print, partial tire tracks, and 3 cigarette butts found nearby. "The problem wasn't lack of evidence," explained retired Detective Frank Morrison in a 2015 interview. "It was what we could do with that evidence in 1976. DNA testing didn't exist. We had fingerprinting, blood typing, hair comparison, primitive tools by today's standards." The lab analysis revealed little. The cigarettes were Marlboro Reds, the boot was a common Sears work boot, and the tire tracks matched multiple vehicle types. The only fingerprints on the bicycle belonged to Sarah and her family members. One piece of evidence stood out. A small torn piece of fabric caught on a thorny bush near the bicycle. Dark blue cotton, with a distinctive white thread pattern, it didn't match anything Sarah had been wearing. Investigators suspected it came from the perpetrator's clothing during a struggle. "That scrap of fabric became our best hope," Morrison recalled. "We sealed it in an evidence bag, knowing we'd exhausted our current abilities to analyze it." As often happens in small communities facing tragedy, rumors spread rapidly through Hancock County, complicating the investigation. One rumor suggested Sarah had run away to Tampa with an older boy from a neighboring county. Another claimed she'd been taken by a carnival worker from the traveling fair that had visited 2 weeks earlier. The most persistent rumor involved a mysterious hippie commune, allegedly operating deep in the woods outside town. Each rumor required investigation, draining resources and time. Deputies tracked down the older boy, who had been at military basic training in Texas since May. They interviewed every carnival employee and found no connection. The hippie commune turned out to be 3 college students camping while conducting an environmental study. For 3 years, the department followed every lead, no matter how unlikely. A waitress in Georgia thought she served Sarah in 1977. A trucker claimed to have picked up a hitchhiker matching her description near the Florida-Alabama line. A psychic from Tampa insisted Sarah's body would be found near water and 3 large rocks. None led to Sarah. What do you think would be the hardest part of investigating a case like this in the 1970s? The technology limitations? The lack of cameras everywhere? Drop your thoughts in the comments. By 1979, the active investigation slowed. Sheriff Briggs, who had promised Janet Mitchell, "We won't stop until we find her," struggled with the inevitable. The case file, now filling 3 boxes, moved from active to cold status. The dedicated phone line was disconnected. In the evidence room, carefully preserved in climate-controlled storage, waited the elements that would eventually speak after decades of silence. The cigarette butts, the boot print casting, and that small torn piece of fabric, patient witnesses to a crime that refused to stay buried despite the passage of time. The case was cold, but the evidence remained, waiting for science to catch up to justice. The day the Hancock County Sheriff's Department officially classified Sarah's case as cold, Janet Mitchell made a promise to herself. "If they won't look for her, I will." What began as a mother's desperate search transformed into a lifelong mission. Janet Mitchell, once a quiet homemaker who rarely spoke up at PTA meetings, became an unstoppable force. She taught herself about investigation procedures, missing persons laws, and eventually, forensic science. "Grief either breaks you or rebuilds you," Janet told a reporter on the 10th anniversary of Sarah's disappearance. "I chose to rebuild myself into someone who could find my daughter." This story gets even more extraordinary as we go deeper. If you're finding value in learning about these forgotten cases and the families who never gave up, help us reach more people by hitting that like button and sharing this video. Your support means these stories, and the lessons they teach us about justice, reach the audience they deserve. Every June 17th, without fail, Janet organized a vigil at Hancock County Park. The first year, over 300 people attended. By the 5th anniversary, the crowd had thinned to about 50. By the 10th, barely 20 people gathered around the memorial oak tree planted in Sarah's honor. But Janet never missed a year. Neither did Deputy James Carlson, who had found Sarah's bicycle that morning in 1976. Even after his retirement in 1994, he returned annually, standing silently at the back of the gathering, his face weathered by time and unresolved duty. The local newspaper ran an anniversary story each year, relegated from front page to local section to eventually just a calendar listing. Sarah Mitchell Remembrance Vigil, 7 p.m., County Park. "People forget," Janet said in a rare moment of bitterness during a 1989 interview. "They're allowed to forget. I'm not." When DNA analysis emerged as a forensic tool in the early 1990s, Janet Mitchell saw hope. She petitioned the department to re-examine the evidence using the new technology. Sheriff Thomas Grayson, who had been a rookie deputy during the original investigation, agreed. In 1992, the cigarette butts and fabric sample were sent to the state crime lab. The results? Inconclusive. The samples had degraded too much, and the technology was still too limited for the small amounts of biological material present. A second attempt came in 2001 when advanced DNA techniques allowed for analysis of smaller samples. Again, Janet pushed for retesting. Again, disappointment followed. The evidence was properly preserved, explained forensic scientist Dr. Anita Ramirez. But the technology of 2001 still required more material than what was present on these decades-old samples. A third attempt in 2011, this time using touch DNA analysis, yielded a partial profile. Not enough for identification, but enough to exclude certain suspects. It was progress, but not the breakthrough the Mitchells had prayed for. What cold case has stayed with you over the years? Have you followed one that was eventually solved? Share your thoughts in the comments. Hancock County changed in subtle ways after Sarah disappeared. Parents no longer allowed children to ride bikes alone on county roads. The annual summer festival added mandatory ID checks for all children. The high school yearbook maintained an honorary page for Sarah until 1986, when a new principal, who had moved from out of state, ended the tradition, not understanding its significance. Perhaps most telling was the local vernacular. When someone vanished without explanation, a spouse who abandoned a family, a business owner who skipped town with investments, locals would say they pulled a Sarah. The phrase persisted even among those born long after 1976, a linguistic ghost haunting generations who never knew her. For the Hancock County Sheriff's Department, the Mitchell case became both a wound and a cautionary tale. New deputies were shown the case file during training as an example of thorough, but ultimately unsuccessful investigation tactics. Sheriff Walter Briggs never forgave himself. After retirement, he visited Janet Mitchell every Christmas until his death in 1997, always bringing a poinsettia and always saying the same thing: "I'm still sorry, Janet." Deputy Carlson, who found the bicycle, kept a copy of Sarah's school photo in his wallet until the day he died. His daughter found it while arranging his funeral in 2015, by then faded nearly beyond recognition, but carefully laminated and preserved. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just missing. She was a void in the community's history that nothing could fill until 2025. Detective Marcus Harrington wasn't supposed to be in the evidence archive on that rainy Tuesday in January 2025. At 42, with 15 years on the force and a reputation for closing difficult cases, his assignment to inventory the department's cold case storage during a budget-mandated reorganization felt like a demotion. Busy work, he called it, as he logged boxes of forgotten files into the new digital system, until box MT 76113 caught his attention: the Sarah Mitchell case. Harrington had moved to Hancock County only 5 years earlier, after a distinguished career with the Miami-Dade Police Department. Tall, with salt and pepper hair that had started graying prematurely in his 30s, he carried himself with the focused intensity of someone perpetually solving puzzles in his head. Cold cases aren't just unsolved mysteries, Harrington often told rookies. They're promises we haven't kept yet. For Harrington, this wasn't just a professional philosophy. It was deeply personal. In 1992, his cousin Melissa vanished while walking home from a movie theater in Orlando. Her case went cold after 6 months. 19 years later, a construction crew uncovered her remains while breaking ground for a new apartment complex. Her killer was never identified. There's a special kind of torment in not knowing, Harrington explained in a 2023 interview for a law enforcement journal. My aunt lived with that torment for 19 years. Every missing person case is someone's Melissa. This driving motivation had pushed Harrington to specialize in reviving stalled investigations. In Miami, he'd solved 3 cold cases using updated forensic techniques. But since transferring to the quieter Hancock County Sheriff's Department to be closer to his aging parents, he'd been assigned mostly routine investigations. As Harrington opened the Mitchell case files that January day, something clicked. The meticulous documentation by the original investigators, the carefully preserved evidence, the annual notes added by various sheriffs acknowledging Janet Mitchell's requests for updates. This case was waiting for someone, Harrington would later say. It had been preserved so carefully, almost like they knew someday the right technology would come along. He spent his lunch break reading witness statements. By evening, he'd reviewed the entire investigation. By midnight, he'd drafted a proposal to reopen the case using modern forensic techniques, specifically forensic genetic genealogy, a method unavailable during previous attempts. You want to waste resources on a 49-year-old case? Sheriff Diana Lowry questioned when Harrington presented his proposal. We have current cases that need attention. The department's senior detectives were equally dubious. Every few years someone gets a wild hair about the Mitchell girl, Detective Samuel Warren said during the staff meeting. DNA testing in 92, again in R01, touch DNA in 11, all dead ends. What makes you think 2025 is magically different? Even Deputy Carlson's son, now a patrol officer himself, expressed doubt. That case broke my father. He carried it until he died. What makes you special enough to solve what he couldn't? The skepticism wasn't personal. The department had weathered budget cuts and was stretched thin. Resources allocated to a cold case meant resources taken from current investigations. I'm going to reveal something truly remarkable about this case in just a moment. If you're interested in the science behind modern cold case breakthroughs, Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of our upcoming deep dives into forensic technology. The methods Detective Harrington used weren't even imaginable when Sarah disappeared. Despite the resistance, Harrington secured conditional approval, 2 months to show progress before the case would be shelved again. He converted a corner of his garage into a case room, pinning timelines and photos to a corkboard, creating the war room the department couldn't spare. His approach was methodical, bordering on obsessive. First, he digitized every document, creating searchable files and cross-referenced data points that revealed patterns missed in the paper-based investigation. Second, he tracked down surviving witnesses, recording new interviews that sometimes contradicted statements made in the emotional aftermath of 1976. Third, he mapped the original crime scene using modern geographic software, identifying sightlines and access points not considered in the original investigation. Most importantly, he cataloged every piece of physical evidence, assessing each for potential DNA testing using methods that hadn't existed during previous attempts. DNA science has evolved more in the last 5 years than the previous 20, he explained to a reluctant evidence technician. What was impossible in 2011 might be routine now. The cigarette butts, the fabric sample, items from Sarah's backpack that might retain touch DNA. Each represented a potential thread to the truth, if modern science could finally give them a voice after decades of silence. When Sarah Mitchell disappeared in 1976, DNA profiling didn't exist. Forensic science relied on blood typing, fingerprints, and microscopic hair comparison, methods now considered rudimentary by modern standards. To understand the magnitude of this breakthrough, Detective Harrington explained in his case notes, you have to appreciate how dramatically forensic science evolved over 5 decades. The first DNA profiling techniques weren't developed until 1984 by British geneticist Sir Alec Jeffreys, 8 years after Sarah vanished. The FBI didn't launch its DNA database system, CODIS, until 1990. The first cold case solved using DNA occurred in 1991. Each decade brought exponential advances. The 1990s required blood samples the size of quarters. By the 2000s, testing could work with samples the size of pinheads. The 2010s introduced touch DNA analysis, detecting cells left by merely handling an object. But the revolution that would crack Sarah's case came in the 2020s, forensic genetic genealogy, combining DNA analysis with genealogical research to identify suspects through distant relatives. Harrington's focus centered on 3 evidence items: the cigarette butts, the fabric sample, and, most promising, Sarah's hairbrush, which had been collected from her bedroom but never tested. The preservation methods in 1976 weren't optimized for DNA, Harrington noted in his request for testing. But the evidence technicians did something crucial. They kept these items dry, dark, and undisturbed. When Harrington opened the original evidence boxes, he found the cigarette butts in glass vials, the fabric in a sealed paper envelope, and the hairbrush wrapped in acid-free paper, all stored in temperature-controlled conditions thanks to Deputy Carlson's foresight in 1976. Carlson couldn't have known about DNA, Harrington told the current evidence technician. But he treated this evidence like it was sacred, like he knew someday it would speak. The Hancock County Sheriff's Department lacked resources for advanced genetic analysis. Harrington needed an outside lab, one with cutting-edge capabilities and experience with degraded samples. Enter Dr. Lydia Washington at the Atlantic Forensic Institute, a private lab specializing in cold cases. Herself, the daughter of a detective, Dr. Washington agreed to expedite the testing when she heard Sarah's story. Degraded DNA from the 1970s presents unique challenges, Dr. Washington explained during her initial assessment. Environmental factors, preservation methods, contamination risks all affect recovery. But we have techniques now that can extract profiles from samples once considered hopeless. Using a method called massively parallel sequencing, the lab began analyzing the cigarette butts first. The results: a partial male DNA profile, but too degraded for definitive identification. Next came the fabric sample, Another partial profile emerged, matching the cigarettes, confirming both came from the same individual. Finally, Sarah's hairbrush provided her complete DNA profile, the first time her genetic fingerprint had ever been documented. We now had half the equation, Harrington noted. Sarah's DNA and partial DNA from her likely abductor, but without a suspect to compare against, we still lacked identification. Have you ever taken a consumer DNA test like 23andMe or Ancestry? Did you know those same technologies are revolutionizing how cold cases are solved? Tell me in the comments. On March 15, 2025, Dr. Washington uploaded the unknown male's DNA profile to GeneLink, a public genetic genealogy database where users consent to law enforcement searches. Unlike CODIS, which requires exact matches from criminal offenders, GeneLink can identify distant relatives through shared genetic markers. The system identified 17 potential relatives, none closer than third cousins to the unknown subject. This meant hours of traditional genealogical research, building family trees forward and backward through time. Dr. Washington assembled a team of genetic genealogists who worked around the clock, constructing a massive family tree with over 2,000 individuals across 6 generations. It's like solving a puzzle where half the pieces are missing, explained genealogist Maria Hoffman. We look for patterns, eliminate impossible branches, and gradually narrow down to potential candidates. After 3 weeks of intensive analysis, the team identified 3 potential suspects, all male descendants from a common ancestor who would have been the right age in 1976 and had connections to Hancock County. On April 12, 2025, at 2:17 a.m., Detective Harrington's phone rang. Dr. Washington's voice trembled with excitement. "We have him, Detective. 99.8% confidence." The name that appeared on Harrington's screen hit him like a physical blow. Not a drifter, not an unknown predator passing through town, but a name documented multiple times in the original case file, a name so familiar to the community that it had never triggered serious suspicion. "I need to verify this before we proceed," Harrington said, his heart racing. "If you're right, this changes everything we thought we knew about this case." "I'm right," Dr. Washington replied. "Science doesn't lie. And there's more. The genetic markers suggest he may be linked to other unsolved cases in the database." Harrington hung up and stared at the name on his screen. After 49 years of silence, science had finally given Sarah Mitchell a voice and identified the man who had taken her. Richard "Rick" Donovan, age 73. Owner of Donovan's General Store, the very same store where Sarah Mitchell had worked part-time. Father of Michael Donovan, Sarah's high school boyfriend. Respected business owner. Little League coach for 20 years. Former Hancock County Citizen of the Year 1992. Church deacon, husband, grandfather of 5. And, according to DNA evidence, Sarah Mitchell's abductor. "Sometimes the monster isn't hiding under the bed," Detective Harrington would later say at a press conference. "Sometimes he's making your coffee every morning at the local store." Richard Donovan had moved to Hancock County in 1970, purchasing the general store after a stint in the military. Married with a young son, he quickly established himself as a friendly, reliable community fixture. His store became the heart of the small town, a gathering place where locals caught up on news and gossip. Psychological profilers would later describe Donovan as a community-integrated predator, someone who built a carefully crafted public persona while harboring violent impulses. His military records revealed a disciplinary incident in Germany that had been sealed. A confrontation with a local teenage girl that was resolved quietly and without charges. "He created the perfect cover," explained FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Teresa Hoffman. "A business where young people naturally congregated, a position that gave him access and authority, a reputation above reproach." For 48 years after Sarah's disappearance, Donovan continued his life in Hancock County. He attended her memorial services. He comforted her parents in his store. He contributed to the reward fund for information. In perhaps the most disturbing revelation, Janet Mitchell had clung to Rick Donovan as a source of support during her darkest days. "He was always so kind," she told investigators, visibly shaken after his arrest. He would close the store early to attend Sarah's vigils. He kept her photo by the register for years. While maintaining his public persona, Donovan's private life showed subtle warning signs that only became clear in retrospect. His marriage ended in 1982 after his wife reported increasing emotional distance. 2 female employees quit the store in the 1990s, citing uncomfortable attention, but never filing formal complaints. His son Michael eventually moved across the country. Their relationship strained for reasons neither would discuss publicly. As investigators dug deeper, disturbing patterns emerged. 3 other unsolved disappearances within a 100-mile radius showed similarities to Sarah's case. 1979, Karen Lewis, 17, vanished while walking home from a movie theater in Claiborne County. Donovan's credit card records showed purchases in that county the same weekend. 1984, Teresa Washington, 15, disappeared from a shopping center in Westlake. Donovan had attended a business owners' convention there the same week. 1988, Linda Mercer, 16, went missing from a bus stop in Grantville. Phone records confirmed Donovan had family in the area whom he visited regularly. DNA testing on evidence from these cold cases was immediately prioritized. By July 2025, preliminary results linked Donovan to Karen Lewis's case with high probability. The others remained under investigation. How did Donovan escape scrutiny for nearly 5 decades? The answer lay in a perfect storm of circumstances and calculated behavior. First, as Sarah's boyfriend's father and employer, he was interviewed during the initial investigation, but only as a character witness and information source, never as a suspect. His alibi, inventory work at his store, was corroborated by his then-wife, though she would later admit to investigators she had been running errands for part of that day. Second, his position in the community provided insulation from suspicion. "We create mental blind spots around people we respect," explained Dr. Hoffman. The possibility that the man who sponsors Little League and organizes food drives could be a predator simply doesn't compute for most people. Third, he strategically maintained relationships with law enforcement. The store offered free coffee to deputies. He donated to police fundraisers. He attended sheriff's department barbecues. Former Sheriff Thomas Grayson had been his hunting buddy for 20 years. Most cunningly, Donovan occasionally offered helpful suggestions about Sarah's case, always steering investigators toward other theories: transient workers, out-of-state connections, or the possibility she had run away. The most dangerous predators often hide behind respected positions in communities. Does this case change how you think about unsolved mysteries in your hometown? Let me know in the comments. At 6:30 a.m. on April 14, 2025, Detective Harrington and 4 deputies arrived at Richard Donovan's modest home on Maple Street. Now a widower, his second wife had passed in 2020, Donovan lived alone, still active in community affairs despite his age. When Donovan opened the door in his bathrobe, Harrington noted his expression was puzzled but not anxious, the face of a man who had never expected this moment to come. "Richard Donovan, you're under arrest for the abduction and murder of Sarah Mitchell," Harrington announced, the words he had waited months to say. Donovan's only response as the handcuffs closed around his wrists: "Took you long enough." The confession that would follow shocked even veteran investigators, not just for its content, but for the matter-of-fact delivery from a man who had waited 49 years to tell his story. For 49 years, the Mitchell family set an extra place at their Thanksgiving table: an empty chair, a plate never filled, a ritual of remembrance for Sarah. In 2025, that chair remained empty, but for the first time, the family knew why. "It's a strange feeling," David Mitchell, now 61, told reporters, relief and heartbreak arriving together after half a century of waiting. Before we conclude this extraordinary story of perseverance and long-delayed justice, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. These stories matter, not just as fascinating cases, but as reminders that time doesn't erase the truth. Hit that notification bell to join our community dedicated to keeping cold cases in the spotlight. Janet Mitchell, now 83, learned of Richard Donovan's arrest while in assisted living. The woman who had spent 49 years demanding answers received the news with unexpected calm. She just nodded, her caretaker reported. Then she said, "I knew it wasn't a stranger. Strangers don't haunt you for 50 years. Robert Mitchell hadn't lived to see justice. He passed in 2003 after years of alcohol abuse that his friends attributed to his inability to protect his daughter. His final words to Janet had been, "Keep looking." David Mitchell, Sarah's younger brother who had grown up in the shadow of his sister's absence, had become a forensic scientist, his life's work shaped by the void in his family. When Harrington called with news of the arrest, David's response was professional. "What's the confidence interval on the DNA match?" When told 99.8%, he finally allowed himself to weep. Hancock County reacted to Donovan's arrest with collective shock that evolved into betrayal, then rage. The store where generations had bought groceries, shared gossip, and posted community flyers became overnight a macabre landmark. "He watched us search for her," said Eleanor Wilson, 72, who had participated in the original search parties, handed out water to volunteers, comforted Janet, all while knowing. The church where Donovan had served as deacon held a service of atonement. The Little League retired the trophy bearing his name. The Citizen of the Year plaque was removed from City Hall. Most poignantly, dozens of community members who had gradually stopped attending Sarah's annual vigils returned en masse for a spontaneous gathering at her memorial tree. The crowd, nearly 500 people, included original search volunteers, their children, and even their grandchildren. What emotions would you experience if a decades-old case in your community was suddenly solved? Would it bring healing or reopen wounds? Share your thoughts below. As prosecutors built their case against Richard Donovan, the legal challenges were substantial. Physical evidence had degraded, witnesses had died, memories had faded. "The DNA is compelling," District Attorney Maria Vasquez explained at a press briefing, "but we're building a comprehensive case that goes beyond genetics." Investigators executed search warrants on Donovan's home, business, and a storage unit he had maintained since 1977. What they discovered confirmed their worst fears: a hidden collection of items belonging to Sarah and potentially other victims. A journal detailed crimes spanning decades. The discovery transformed the case from a single murder to potentially one of the most significant serial predator cases in Florida history. The Mitchell case quickly became a template for cold case units nationwide. The combination of preserved evidence, genetic genealogy, and dedicated detective work created what the FBI termed the Hancock Protocol, a methodology for approaching decades-old cases with new technological tools. Within 6 months of Donovan's arrest, 12 cold cases across 7 states were reopened using similar techniques. 4 yielded immediate breaks. What Detective Harrington accomplished wasn't just solving one case, FBI Director Callahan stated. He demonstrated that the passage of time no longer guarantees escaping justice. On June 17, 2025, exactly 49 years after Sarah disappeared, the town of Hancock officially renamed the Central Park Sarah Mitchell Memorial Park. The ceremony, attended by thousands, featured the dedication of a permanent exhibit detailing both the case and the technological advances that finally solved it. Janet Mitchell, assisted by Detective Harrington, cut the ribbon on a new cold case resource center bearing her daughter's name. Funded by federal grants, the center would provide resources for families of missing persons and training for rural law enforcement agencies. Sarah would have been 65 this year, Janet told the silent crowd. We lost the woman she would have become. But in her absence, she changed how we search for the missing. She changed how we remember. And ultimately, she changed how justice works in this country. As Detective Harrington often says in his now frequent lectures to police academies, cold cases aren't cold. They're just waiting for the right technology and the right person who refuses to stop looking. The truth about Sarah Mitchell waited 49 years to emerge, but in the end, It did, because evidence persists. Science advances and sometimes justice is patient.